Has this ever happened to you? You've had a piece of gear for a really long time and you've never realized it can do something until many years later. And the fact that it can do that thing just makes you fall in love with it even more. That happened to me recently, actually in a live stream. I do these live streams every so often on YouTube. And that thing is insanely simple. It's just an extra output on one of my pedals. On this here, this volume pedal, this is the Layla Active Mono Volume pedal. This is probably my favorite pedal just because I use it to control a lot of other pedals that I have. And I'll explain in a second how I do that. So I've done a video on this before and I'll link that down below. You can watch that if you want. I've also done a video, and it's one of my highest viewed videos, on my entire pedal board setup. This is for acoustic guitars, by the way. And that video did really well, but it's quite long, and I go through my whole setup and how I use this volume pedal in combination with some other pedals. And I actually had a lot of people ask me, can you explain that bit again? That was just a little bit confusing. So I thought I would talk about that a bit as well, because it ties in with how I use this direct output as well. And there's also been a few people asking about this specific setup in my Song Club community. That's a free community that I host. Link for that is in the description down below if you want to check it out. So I'm hoping that this will bring some clarity for those people as well. So I have something that's called a wet and dry system. And that basically just means I have my guitar signal and then I double it up somehow. There's different ways to do that, and I'll explain that in a bit. And that's kind of to do with the direct output here. So I just double it. And then one signal is like a dry. So that means there's little to no effects going on. It's very direct. And the other one is wet, which means there's lots of effects going on. And I put lots of extreme effects on this signal. And the benefit of that is that you can control, if you control the wet signal, you can control how much effects are applied to your original signal. So we have two parallel signals. One is dry, which is little to no effects, and one is wet, which is a lot of effects. And then I put the volume pedal somewhere in the wet lane, either at the start or at the end or somewhere in the middle. You know, it has slight differences depending on where you put your volume pedal, but that basically lets me control just the wet signal, which is really cool because it lets me control in the middle of a performance how much, let's say, reverb I put in to the signal or not. What I usually do when I start a song, I choose which effects I want in that song, right? Normally it's not that many, you know. And then I use the volume pedal to bring that in or take it out whenever I want during the song. So that's my controller. If you imagine that, I set the pedals that I want, and then I use the volume pedal as my controller to control these effects, right? And it works really well. However, I've always used some complicated setup. Like in this other video that I had of me explaining my whole setup, I actually used the tuner output on my preamp to double up the signal. And then that would go into various different pedals, delay pedal, my Blue Sky, Strymon Blue Sky reverb, and I would put some, more sort of non-natural sounding reverb, let's say, more sort of ambient sort of sounds through that pedal. And then I'd maybe have like distortion pedals or, whatever I wanted on the wet signal, I would put that on the wet signal, right? And then at the end, I think I had it at the end, because it really makes a big difference whether you put the volume pedal at the end or at the start of the signal chain on the wet signal. I think I had this on the end. So then, obviously, if I had it completely off, then I would get no wet signal coming through at all, and I'd just have my original guitar signal with some very simple natural reverb and an EQ, and then I'd just bring it in anytime I want in these emotional moments, in these specific moments in the song where I want a little bit more reverb, a little bit more effects. I'd bring in that wet signal that in these moments, and this volume pedal is really great for that because it's so detailed. It's so specific, I would say, and sensitive. That's what I like about this. I mentioned this before in the time that I did the video on this pedal, and because it actually uses a sensor and a magnet to kind of sense the distance, between what's going on here. It's very, very sensitive, and I really like that, especially for the type of music that I do. So because this has a direct output itself, I then don't need to double up the signal from my preamp. I decided to double up the signal here directly on the volume pedal. And I can do that with the direct out. So this has, I'll tell you about these here. So it has, this one is the input. So that's just a normal input. So I'd go through from my guitar, I would go into my preamp. I would then go from my preamp into an EQ. And then from the EQ, I would go into like a natural sounding reverb. So this would be my dry signal. So it's all just one signal so far. And then I would go into the volume pedal. So that's the input, right? And now I have a volume out, which is affected by what I do here. And then I have a direct out. And this time, the direct out is actually my dry signal, because that's not affected by the volume pedal. That's just, when it says direct, it just means that is what it is. Directly, it's direct out. It's not affected by what's going on here, by what's going on with the volume pedal, which is really useful if I want one signal like this wet and dry setup, one signal, the dry signal, which is I don't want a volume pedal on, and then a wet signal, which I do want the volume pedal on. And this basically replaces that. So the dry signal, I go out and that goes into just my interface or a PA system, whatever I'm doing, a recorder, that's just my normal guitar signal, right? That is not affected by the volume. And then I have the volume out, and that is affected by what I'm doing here with the volume. And then I go from there into all the different effects. So it is slightly different because it's starting with the volume pedal. So the volume pedal comes first, and then it's all the different effects, which is, I'm not saying it's better or it's worse than having a volume pedal at the end. It's just different. It's a different sort of, it will give you a different sound. But it works, and I like it. I like it a lot, and I really liked it at the live stream. And I think I'll be continuing to use this setup because it's almost a simpler way of doing this, you know, and using this direct output to my advantage. And if you have a direct output and you don't know what to do with it, and you think maybe you want to use it for something, but you just don't know what, maybe something like this could spark an idea. Maybe this could help you in some kind of way. Maybe you don't want to do a wet and dry setup, but maybe something else, you know, maybe all kinds of things. Maybe you want to have some kind of stereo setup and the direct output is just like you pan one to the left, one to the right, you know. Or I don't know, maybe you want to just use the direct out to have some kind of other signal path, and then you can put different effects into that, and then have that on a different, you know, input on your recording device or whatever. You know, it's just, I thought I wanted to express this on a video because it's just something that just happened, and maybe it can inspire you and help you with what you're doing and your projects. If you're interested in the Layla mono volume pedal, then I highly recommend it. It's high quality, high end, active mono volume pedal. They're made here in Germany. They do a stereo version of this as well, and they do a smaller version as well. Some people like the smaller one. I like the big and chunky one, but the smaller one is cool as well. I'll put a link for this in the description down below so you can check that out. Also, if you're feeling confused about acoustic guitar pickups and pedals and preamps and EQ and how to get the best sound out of your acoustic guitar pickup, then I've just released a free course on this in my community, the Song Club, and I'll put a link for that in the description down below. And if you want to watch that video that I did explaining my whole different setup, I'll just link it up here. So click on that and I'll see you over there. Bye.